If you own an electric car in America, there is a very good chance a company you cannot legally buy from is already changing what your car is worth, what your next one will cost, how fast it will charge, and which features you will eventually stop paying extra for. In 2024, the United States put a 100% tariff on Chinese-made electric vehicles, effectively building a wall around companies like BYD. And yet, in the same period, BYD became the biggest force in the global EV market, overtaking Tesla in worldwide electric vehicle sales and selling at a scale that makes the American market look surprisingly small. That contradiction is the story. BYD is blocked from selling its passenger cars directly to most Americans, but it is still forcing Tesla, Ford, GM, Toyota, Stellantis, and the rest of the industry to react. It is cutting prices across the world. It is pushing charging speeds toward numbers American infrastructure cannot yet support. It is making advanced driver assistance technology standard on cars that cost less than some used vehicles in the United States. It is building factories around tariff walls instead of waiting for those walls to come down. And the more you trace this back, the stranger it gets, because this did not begin with a car company at all. It began in Shenzhen in 1995 with a chemist named Wang Chuanfu making rechargeable batteries for cell phones, not engines, not transmissions, not suspension systems, batteries for brands like Nokia and Motorola, in a market dominated by Japanese electronics giants such as Sony. By the early 2000s, BYD had quietly become one of the largest battery manufacturers in the world. That would have been enough for most companies. Batteries were profitable. The business was growing. Stay in your lane. Wang did the opposite. In 2003, BYD bought a struggling Chinese automaker that was close to bankruptcy. Investors hated the move. The stock fell almost immediately, and from the outside the logic looked ridiculous. A phone battery company was suddenly trying to build complete automobiles. But Wang was not looking at a car the way Detroit, Toyota, or Volkswagen looked at a car. He was looking at it like a battery engineer. To him, the future automobile was not an engine with electronics added around it. It was a battery on wheels. That distinction sounds simple now, but 20 years ago it was a completely different way of seeing the product. Legacy automakers spent decades perfecting engines and then treated batteries as another component to source from a supplier, almost like tires, seats, or glass. BYD treated the battery as the center of the entire machine. That matters because when the industry shifted toward electrification, one side had to learn batteries while the other side had already spent years learning cars. In 2008, that strategy received the kind of validation almost nobody expected. Berkshire Hathaway invested $230 million for roughly 10% of BYD. Warren Buffett had spent decades being cautious about technology companies and avoiding businesses he did not believe he understood. Yet Berkshire looked at this obscure Chinese battery and car manufacturer and made the bet anyway. The investment eventually became one of Berkshire's most profitable positions. And what made BYD valuable was not a flashy car. It was manufacturing discipline, battery chemistry, and a founder who had built the company around a technological assumption that the rest of the auto industry had not fully accepted yet. By 2020, that assumption became physical in the form of BYD's Blade battery. It used lithium iron phosphate chemistry, commonly called LFP, and was designed to be cheaper, safer, and structurally useful inside the vehicle. BYD publicized nail penetration testing in which a steel nail was driven through a battery pack to simulate severe internal damage. Instead of exploding into a thermal event, the battery remained remarkably stable. That may not sound like the kind of thing that sells cars in a 30-second commercial, but engineers notice it because battery safety, cost, packaging, thermal management, and structural strength are some of the hardest problems in electric vehicles. By the time most American consumers had heard the name BYD, the company had already spent roughly 2 decades building expertise in exactly the part of the automobile that suddenly mattered most. That is why the current EV price war did not begin as a marketing stunt. It was the delayed payoff from years of manufacturing scale. In 2022, BYD stopped producing gasoline-only passenger vehicles entirely. From that point forward, every new vehicle it sold was either fully electric or a plug-in hybrid. Think about how unusual that was. Western automakers were still publicly debating timelines, delaying targets, protecting internal combustion profit centers, and hedging across multiple powertrains. BYD simply walked away from gas-only cars and bet the company on electrification. The timing could not have been better. China was supporting EV adoption aggressively, domestic demand was exploding, and BYD had products across an enormous price range. It could sell an inexpensive city hatchback, mainstream sedans, family SUVs, plug-in hybrids, luxury vehicles, and eventually exotic performance machines. By 2023, BYD passed Volkswagen to become the best-selling car brand in China. Not the best-selling electric brand, the best-selling car brand, period. Then came the global milestone. In 2024, BYD overtook Tesla in worldwide EV volume during a period when Tesla was still the name most Americans associated with the entire category. That alone would have been disruptive. Then BYD started cutting prices even harder. In 2025, the company announced reductions of up to 34% across more than 20 models. Some vehicles effectively became around $10,000 cheaper almost overnight. Other Chinese manufacturers were forced to respond, and smaller competitors suddenly found themselves in a market where survival required matching the economics of a company that controlled huge portions of its own battery supply and vehicle technology. This is where the story stops being about China and starts being about your driveway, because BYD does not need to sell you a car to affect what you pay. Tesla reduced the Model 3 price repeatedly between 2023 and 2025, moving it from roughly $46,000 to below $39,000. Ford cut around $8,000 from the Mustang Mach-E. GM positioned the Equinox EV around a $35,000 entry point because the global definition of an affordable electric crossover was being dragged downward. Those companies had their own reasons for every pricing decision, but Chinese competition changed the reference point. Once a manufacturer on the other side of the world proves that an EV can be built with a certain combination of range, battery size, features, and price, every product planner in Detroit has to explain why their version costs more. That pressure eventually reaches you, even if the Chinese vehicle itself never reaches an American showroom. And price is only the first pressure point. In early 2025, BYD announced that its advanced driver assistance suite called God's Eye would be offered broadly across its lineup with little or no premium at price levels where comparable technology had traditionally been reserved for expensive trims. The system includes functions such as adaptive cruise control, lane centering, automated parking, and highway assistance. Features like these have often been packaged by other automakers into options costing thousands of dollars. BYD's message was more dangerous than the name of the software. It was saying that driver assistance should become normal equipment, not luxury equipment. When that happens in one major market, buyers in other markets start asking why they are still paying extra for it. Elon Musk's public response to BYD's move was reportedly one word: impressive. That is a small reaction, but it tells you the competitive signal was obvious. If technology that once justified a $5,000 or $10,000 option package becomes standard on far cheaper vehicles somewhere else, that margin becomes harder to defend. Then BYD moved to charging. Its Super E platform was presented with a roughly 1,000-volt, 1,000-amp charging architecture capable, under ideal compatible conditions, of adding around 250 miles of range in about 5 minutes. 5 minutes is the number that matters, because it attacks one of the last psychological advantages gasoline still owns. For years, EV critics could reasonably say that even fast charging takes much longer than filling a fuel tank. If charging moves from 30 minutes to 20, that is better. If it moves toward 5, the comparison changes completely. The catch is infrastructure. Most American charging locations cannot simply deliver that kind of power today. The vehicle can be ready before the grid. Cables, dispensers, and site design are ready. BYD says it intends to build thousands of ultra-fast stations in China to support the platform. That means the company is not treating charging as somebody else's problem. It is developing the car and the ecosystem around the car at the same time. On the same platform, the Han L was presented as capable of accelerating from 0 to 60 miles per hour in under 3 seconds. So the breakthrough is not just charging speed. It is the combination of battery design, high-voltage electronics, thermal control, software, and power delivery operating as one stack. Compare that with the experience American buyers have dealt with through this same transition. Ford's F-150 Lightning has faced criticism over real-world range loss in cold conditions, a problem that affects basically every EV but becomes especially noticeable in a large pickup expected to tow and work. GM went through serious software problems with the Blazer EV early in its rollout. Rivian builds some of the most admired electric trucks in the market, but an R1T still starts around premium vehicle money and charges nowhere near the most extreme figures BYD is now advertising. None of this means American engineers lack talent. That explanation is too easy and mostly wrong. The real gap is time. BYD spent years compounding knowledge in battery chemistry, vertical integration, power electronics, and EV manufacturing, while Western companies were still extracting profit from internal combustion. When the market finally moved, all those years of investment appeared on the spec sheet at once. The scale makes that even harder to dismiss. In the first quarter of 2025, BYD sold about 416,000 battery electric vehicles. Over roughly the same period, the entire United States EV market across all brands sold on the order of 350,000 units. One company operating primarily outside the United States was moving more fully electric cars than the combined American market. That is not a niche competitor anymore. That is industrial scale. So why do American roads still look almost completely BYD-free? Because the United States built barriers specifically designed to keep Chinese EVs out. In 2024, the U.S. tariff on Chinese-made electric vehicles rose to 100%, alongside wider restrictions involving connected vehicle technology and national security concerns. Those policies dramatically changed the economics of importing a Chinese EV into the United States. BYD is not losing a normal retail battle here. It has largely been prevented from entering that battle in the first place. Europe moved in the same direction, adding extra duties on Chinese EVs that in some cases pushed tariff rates much higher. BYD's answer was not to wait for policy to become friendlier. It started manufacturing locally. In Hungary, it moved toward producing vehicles inside the European Union. In Brazil, BYD took over and redeveloped the site of a former Ford factory, an image that almost feels too symbolic to be real. A Chinese EV company expanding on the physical footprint left behind by an American legacy automaker. Across Thailand, Indonesia, and other Southeast Asian markets, BYD has pushed aggressively into local sales and production. In Mexico, BYD introduced the Shark plug-in hybrid pickup and demonstrated that the company could compete in a market where trucks matter culturally, not just as utility products. BYD has also explored manufacturing expansion in Mexico, and that is where American policymakers and Detroit executives pay extremely close attention. A vehicle built in Mexico is not automatically exempt from U.S. rules, and trade eligibility depends on specific content, ownership, and regulatory requirements, but local production can fundamentally change the tariff equation. That is the larger strategy. If one country raises the import wall, manufacture on the other side of the wall. If Europe adds duties, build in Europe. If Latin America becomes a growth market, build there. BYD is turning geography into part of its product strategy, and the wall is more porous than most people realize because BYD is already connected to companies Americans know. It has worked with Toyota through a joint venture on electric vehicle development in China. It has participated in battery supply relationships with global automakers, including Ford in certain markets and programs. It has also partnered with Stellantis around EV ventures and technology in Europe. So even while American buyers are blocked from walking into a dealership and ordering a BYD-badged passenger car, pieces of BYD's technology, supply relationships, and competitive influence are already circulating through the global industry. That is why watching BYD matters even if you never plan to own one. This company can influence your resale value without selling a car in your state. It can influence the option list on your next EV. It can influence whether a 400-volt charging system still feels acceptable 5 years from now. It can influence how much range people expect for $35,000, what driver assistance features feel standard, and how quickly legacy automakers have to depreciate older technology. And BYD is not limiting itself to cheap transportation. That is another reason the threat is difficult to categorize. The company has built the Yangwang performance and luxury brand, And the U9 supercar is a 4-motor electric machine making roughly 1,100 horsepower, with independent control at each wheel. BYD demonstrated the car using its DCIS X active suspension system to make all 4 wheels lift from the ground in a synchronized hop. It looks like a social media stunt, and in one sense it is, but the engineering underneath it is serious. If a manufacturer can control vertical suspension movement and torque at each wheel with that level of precision, the same underlying systems can be used for stability, ride quality, traction, and emergency control. The Yangwang U8 takes the weirdness even further. It can perform a tank turn, rotating in place by driving wheels on opposite sides in different directions. BYD has demonstrated limited emergency water float capability under specific conditions. It can also use its independently controlled drivetrain to keep moving in unusual failure scenarios. These are not features most people need. That is exactly why they matter. They prove BYD is no longer just trying to win the low-cost EV race. It wants to show that the same vertically integrated technology stack can stretch from bargain hatchback to extreme luxury engineering. At the opposite end sits the Seagull, a small electric hatchback priced in China at around 69,800 yuan, roughly under 10,000 US dollars depending on exchange rates. That number is almost alien from an American perspective. The United States does not currently have a new EV anywhere near that price, even after tariffs, shipping, safety requirements, local market equipment, and dealer economics are considered. The existence of a functional EV at that base cost changes expectations. It proves there is room to take cost out of the system. BYD has also created the Fangcheng Bao brand for rugged electrified off-road vehicles, targeting buyers who might otherwise look at something like a Jeep Wrangler or other lifestyle SUVs. In other words, this is not one successful sedan, one cheap city car, or one luxury experiment. BYD is attacking multiple layers of the market at the same time. That is the part established automakers should find most uncomfortable. Tesla proved electric vehicles could be desirable. BYD is trying to prove they can be desirable, cheap, luxurious, absurdly fast, technologically dense, and manufactured at enormous scale all at once. Now bring that back to the title of this video. If you already own an electric car, you need to watch this because the next 3 to 5 years may change the value equation faster than the first decade of mainstream EV adoption did. Think about what happens when charging speed doubles or triples. An older EV does not suddenly stop working, but the market may start viewing its 30-minute charging curve the way smartphone buyers view an old charging standard. Think about what happens when advanced highway assistance becomes standard equipment on entry-level cars. A used vehicle that originally charged $8,000 for a technology package may not retain that premium when the same capability becomes ordinary. Think about what happens when global EV prices keep falling while battery manufacturing improves. Your car can still be excellent and still face depreciation pressure because the replacement gets better faster than buyers expected. That is the uncomfortable side of rapid innovation. The good news is that competition also gives owners better options. Cheaper new EVs push used EV prices down. Faster charging forces networks to upgrade. Better battery safety becomes an expectation instead of a selling point. More standard technology reduces the number of expensive option packages. And even if tariffs keep BYD-branded vehicles out of the United States for years, the competitive pressure does not stay behind the tariff. Tesla sees it, Ford sees it, GM sees it, Toyota sees it, Stellantis sees it, battery suppliers see it, charging companies see it. Everyone who has to price an electric vehicle against the rest of the world sees it. That is why the deepest lesson here is not that China built a cheap car or that one company outsold another company for a quarter. It is that BYD made one strategic bet before most of the industry understood the stakes. It decided the battery was not a component of the future car. The battery was the foundation of the future car. Once you see the story through that lens, almost every later move makes sense. Buying an automaker in 2003 was not random diversification. It was a way to wrap a vehicle around battery expertise. Stopping gas-only production in 2022 was not reckless ideology. It was committing the company to the technology it already understood best. Cutting prices was not simply desperation. Vertical integration gave BYD room to weaponize cost, Giving driver assistance away was not generosity. It was a way to turn yesterday's premium feature into tomorrow's minimum expectation. Building ultra-fast chargers was not a side project. It was a way to make the battery's biggest weakness feel less relevant. Building factories in Hungary, Brazil, Mexico, and Asia was not just globalization. It was a method for converting tariff walls into construction plans. And building a supercar that hops, or an SUV that can perform a tank turn, was not necessary for volume. It was a statement that the same company known for cheap EVs also wanted to define the technological ceiling. 20 years ago, the auto industry looked at BYD and saw a battery supplier wandering into a business it did not understand. Today, the auto industry is buying batteries, licensing platforms, cutting prices, accelerating charging plans, and rethinking software because companies like BYD changed the pace of the game. That historical irony is the whole story. Detroit did not miss BYD because there were no warning signs. It missed BYD because the warning signs did not look like a car company. They looked like a chemist, a battery factory, a strange acquisition, and years of unglamorous manufacturing work in a market far away. By the time the threat finally looked like a car, the advantage had already compounded. So if you own an EV today, do not obsess over whether a BYD dealership opens down the street next year. Watch what its existence forces everyone else to do. Watch charging speed. Watch battery cost. Watch standard driver assistance features. Watch the price of entry-level EVs. Watch the resale market as newer vehicles arrive with capabilities that used to belong to luxury models. And watch where BYD builds next, because tariffs can slow products down, but they cannot erase manufacturing knowledge. The question now is not whether BYD can influence the American EV market. It already has. The real question is what happens if the physical cars ever arrive at scale. Does Detroit use the time behind the tariff wall to catch up in batteries, cost, software, and charging? Or does BYD spend those same years building even more factories, more infrastructure, and an even larger lead? If you want more deep dives into the forces changing the cars you buy and the technology you actually live with, subscribe, and tell me which outcome you think is more likely. American automakers close the gap before Chinese EVs gain a real path into the market, or the gap gets wider while the walls are still standing.